Okay, so I would like to talk about today my study. It's called Cross-Language Translation Priming in Turkish-English Bilinguals, Lexical Decision Task with different levels of second language proficiency. So it might be look a little bit complicated, but I will explain it further. So first, I would like to start with the models that were proposed in the literature. So these models were trying to explain the bilingual lexical representation and processing. So the first one is proposed by de Groot in 1992 and 93. It's called the Distributed Conceptual Future Model. And the second one is the revised hierarchical model by Kroll and Stewart in 94. So I will explain them. I will try to summarize them. So they both actually have the same two assumptions. So over the years, there were debate about whether lexical and conceptual levels of representations are either separate or not in a bilingual person. So actually, de Groot and Kroll and Stewart were assuming that they are separate. And the second assumption is that bilinguals to languages share the same conceptual system. So in the DCF model, the point is that they propose that between any pair of words, the connection can be seen in terms of the numbers of semantic features they share. So with this idea, they also say that between the two words, if there are more features that are shared, the stronger the connection is between them. So actually, this model also proposes the idea that a person with a high second language proficiency would have stronger connections. And the RTM model was actually a more elaborate model in the sense that they actually considered the different directions and different type of connections. So they proposed that in a second language word and its first language translation may be connected both directly at the lexical level. So they assume that it is why L2, L1 direction is actually more stronger than the opposite direction. And also this model would also suggest that links become stronger with higher second language proficiency. And when we look at the previous findings, in the literature, I won't go into detail about them, but I want you to know that they all used the non-cognate mask translation priming paradigm. And there were actually, you can see that there are a lot of contradictory findings and a lot of contradictory findings about second language proficiency also. So they were also seeing a phenomenon called cross-language asymmetry, priming asymmetry. So this asymmetry suggests that in the direction from the first language to second language, it's actually priming more stronger than the opposite direction. And there is also a model that is trying to explain why is this the case, why there is an asymmetry between the two directions. So it has two basic assumptions. First one is semantic overlap underlies cross-language priming in an lexical decision task. So I will try to explain the image by explaining the second assumption. So as you can see, the word in the first language has more semantic senses than its translation equivalent in the second language. So basically, this model says that there is an asymmetry because while the first language word can activate all the semantic senses in the second language word, when you try to do the opposite, the second language word fails to activate all the senses. It's because they share less semantic senses between them. And overall, my aim was to see whether I could find such asymmetry between Turkish-English bilinguals, and also to see that whether second language proficiency affects the priming. And to do that, I used the lexical decision task, and I used a paradigm called non-cognate mask translation priming. And it might seem confusing, but I will try to explain it in the next slides. So as to my hypothesis, of course, based on the models that I just introduced, I hypothesized that priming from the first language to second, so in our case, priming from Turkish to English would be stronger than the opposite direction, which is from English to Turkish. And I also hypothesized that in the direction of English to Turkish, their priming will increase with higher second language proficiency. So I tested 26 Turkish-English bilinguals, which they had to be native Turkish speakers. And in fact, I excluded one participant's data because I found out that she was not a native Turkish speaker. And as you can see, the mean age was around 24, and participants were participated in exchange for course credits. So in my study, it was actually important that I correctly assessed the proficiency levels of my participants. So in order to do so, I used the test called Lexical. It's an open tail in online, and its validity was proved by a study done in 2012. So with this test scores, I actually divided my participants into two groups of low and high proficiency, which you can see my reference scores. And also, it is important to know the participants' age of acquisitions and the years of use of second language, because in the literature, it's proven to be an effective factor. So in order to do that, I used a questionnaire called LHQ 3.0. And in this questionnaire, I asked about their language history, obviously. And as you can see, I had 4 different separate groups which in the one direction of from Turkish to English, they were separated as high and low. And for the opposite direction, they were separated as high and low also. And also you can see that their mean age of acquisition were actually quite similar. So I actually ran a test, and it was not a significant difference between the groups. But the years of use, actually there is a quite a little bit difference between them. So I will talk about that more. And for a procedure, I designed the lexical decision task by using PsychoPy. And for details, I will explain it in the next slide. But first, I would like to say that I started with a short testing session. So it was of 8 trials, and it was to familiarize the participants to the experiment. And also, each participant was only tested either in the direction of Turkish to English or the opposite, English to Turkish. And with this task, I measured the participants' response times and accuracy rate. So in here, you can see my lexical decision task. I show the fixation point for 1 second. Then I use a mask. So that's why I've been talking about a mask priming paradigm. So I use the mask in order to prevent the prime word being seen visually. So when you use a mask, it's kind of blocking the prime word. So that's why I used it. Otherwise, it would be clearly seen. So I also presented my prime word for 50 milliseconds, which also important in the literature. There were, around 50 or 60 milliseconds, and then a blank screen. And after a blank screen, I got my target word, which is a transition equivalent of the prime word. And at the scene, when they see the target word, they had to respond either A or L. A indicated, yes, it is a word. L indicated, no, it is not a word. So if they did not respond, the target word disappeared after 2 seconds. And also, it is quite important that I really controlled the words I used in my task. I had to control the word length and the mean frequency across their transition equivalents. So I used 110 non-cognate words. So by non-cognate, I mean the words that are not similar with each other, not orthographically or phonologically. So let's say that in English, the word cinema is in Turkish is also cinema, so they are cognate word. I avoid using those kind of words because they can affect my results, and also it is important to use concrete words. I avoid of using abstract words. So you can see that across my Turkish and English words, the word length is quite similar, and also mean frequency is also really high. So when they see a target word, it was actually quite simple for them to recognize it as a word or not. So let's say a prime word is glass, and its transition equivalent is bardak. And I created 2-word list for each direction, from Turkish English and opposite English to Turkish. So as to my results, first I would like to mention that when you're dealing with response time, it is important that you remove your outliers. It is important that you trim your data. So I removed response times less than 200 milliseconds and below or above 2 standard deviations of the participants' mean response time. And I also only analyze the correct answers of the participants. And to analyze them, I use a 2x2 mixed by ANOVA on reaction time and also error rate. So my between subjects factors were actually proficiency level with 2 levels as high and low, and also direction with 2 levels as L1, L2, and the opposite. So as between subjects factor, I use the relatedness of words. So the word pairs were either related or unrelated. In order to see the priming effect, you should see the difference between the response times given for related word pairs and also unrelated word pairs. So it looks quite complicated. I won't go explain them all, but I just want you to see that. So I could not find any significant main effect of the factors of direction or proficiency level alone, or even in the interaction between relatedness of words and direction, and also interaction between relatedness of word and proficiency. But in here, I only found a significant main effect for only relatedness of the word. So you can see that responses given for related word pairs actually quite shorter, significantly shorter than unrelated word pairs. So I can conclude that there is actually priming in the overall participants, but when you look at the different groups, there is no significant main effect. But I had a close p-value for proficiency level. It was 0.065. I will try to explain it in the graphics, but they can be seen a little difference between the proficiency group, but still it was unfortunately not a significant one. And also I looked at the 3 interaction. I looked at interaction between relatedness, proficiency, and direction. Unfortunately, there was not a significant main effect, but I also like to mention that it was kind of close. It was 0.077 p-value. So maybe I thought, as you can see, between the high proficiency level and low proficiency level in the L2, L1 condition, there can be a slight difference, but still, overall, it's not significant. So when we look at the graph, so my hypothesis was that L1, L2 would have a stronger priming than L2, L1. So the blue line indicates the related words, and the green line indicates the unrelated words. So you can see that they had not a significant difference. But what amazed me in here is that I would predict the opposite. I would predict that the L1, L2 condition would respond a little bit faster than the opposite, but we can clearly see here, even though it's not significant, the difference is actually the opposite. And for my second hypothesis, the blue line indicates the L1, L2 condition, and the green one indicates the opposite. So you can see that high proficiency in individuals with high proficiency, they actually responded a little faster to words than low proficiency, but unfortunately there was no significant difference between them. So in conclusion, I failed to reject the null hypothesis of being no difference between between proficiency groups and also the directions. So as I indicated earlier, we can see that there are no significant priming differences between both directions, and also proficiency level does not have an influence on the priming effect in either conditions, in either directions. Sorry about that. So I tried to find an explanation, of course, why my results were non-significant. So firstly, when I look at my findings, I can say that they're not consistent with the revised hierarchical model. So there is no increased priming effect in the L2, L1 direction with a higher proficiency second language. So my hypothesis was that an RTM model suggested that it would increase with a high proficiency level, but my results did not contribute to that idea. But I thought maybe sense model could explain these findings, as primes, they actually fail to sufficiently activate conceptual senses of their transition equivalence. And also
Valeria, let's wrap up in 2 minutes, okay?
Okay, I was done anyway. It was my last slide. So let's keep to the 50 milliseconds prime duration. So overall, I believe I got non-significant results because my participants were unbalanced Turkish-English bilingual. So I would like to study more on that with balanced Turkish-English bilinguals, because I believe that because they are unbalanced, prime words fail to activate the target words sufficiently. And I also believe that if I had a larger sample size, I could get much good and clear results. So thank you so much for listening. I know it was a little bit confusing, and I couldn't give you any more details. And if you are confused or want to ask questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Are there any questions from the audience? Okay, so since we ran a little bit out of time, I will personally give my feedback to you afterwards, Valeria, but thank you. So we can continue with the second presentation. If you can unshare your screen. Meanwhile, I would like to welcome everyone for this fourth mini symposium of the Cognitive Science Master's Program. This year, we had quite a few students who were very enthusiastic about psycholinguistics. So the first session, you'll hear 2 more presentations on the topic related to psycholinguistics. And the second session is more about a model perception and abstract thinking. So we are going to continue with Burak Kurt's presentation, which is titled A Visually Supported Language Model, the Effectiveness of Replacement of Words with Visual Stimulus. You can go ahead, Burak.
Thank you. I think I better be a little bit quick. So I'm just going to jump into the topic. The title is, as Funda Hocam said, I'm a student under the Cognitive Science Master's Program. And my starting point to this question has 2 basics. First one is how we understand and what is the capacity of our brain to learn things. To answer this question, well, basically we can think of the workflow of input and cognitive process. So we get input and we process that input and we produce outputs. What are those inputs? Those inputs are vision, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, and balance. These channels provide input to our brain. Well, we can think of our brain as a closed box. So it doesn't have any interaction with the outside world. Only it gets as signals from these sensory systems. and it makes it provides an understanding of these signals to us in a mysterious way, in a robust description. So in 2015, David Eagleman published a book, and in this book he talked about a project he was carrying on with a colleague of his. The project was based on sensory substitution. The term is basically providing brain with a new, using a sensory system to provide additional information to the brain. So how it works is he designed a vest. This vest gets information, like for example, it is connected to a microphone. And this, if you speak to this microphone, the vest transfers your sentences, your words to the other person's back of the body with vibrations. After a while, the brain, they studied this on a deaf person, and the deaf person's brain, after a while, started to make sense of those vibrations. And they achieved high accuracy, high speed, and they got really good results. And they trained the brain to understand these signals in a short time, like 2 weeks. So one of the very basics of my idea is this, and it is kind of like adding a new sensory system to our existing ones. For example, if you connect it to an infrared camera, and if it gives you the input from that infrared camera, you will basically start seeing infrared, the environment. Well, if our brain thinks it is real for us. And the second point is that the question, is human language efficient enough? Well, we can easily say that, well, it is efficient, and it meets our requirements in most cases. But that is not the question here. For example, let's think of the sign language. In sign language, I'm not really an expert. I just took 1 week of training for that, but they don't have all the function words and auxiliary words. Yet they still can talk about almost anything. They can talk about everything as good as a normal auditory speaking. So instead of, for example, saying, I didn't hear the name in your sentence, they would say something like, I hear name past no. So they only use the necessary parts, and they use the essence to transfer what they want to say. And another example is, in Japanese, they don't use future tense. I mean, they talk about future, but they don't have auxiliary words for future tense. So it makes us think that, why do we use them? Do we even need them? Are they efficient? Do they cause us to lose time when we speak? So, but there's also this thing that sometimes we don't speak to be understood efficiently, to be understood enough. Sometimes we want to say things in 100% accuracy. We want to transfer it with delicate matters. So to answer this question, to get past this problem, I try to design a model that can transfer 100% of what you want to say, but with an efficient way. I will show it in a moment. And here is a small information. And normal speech contains 100 words per minute. We will get back to this at the end of the presentation. So, in short, we can teach our brain to understand new inputs. And we can make our language more effective by omitting some parts. And we can convey 100% with parallel processing, not consecutive reading of words. We can use parallel processing to convey the meaning. So my hypothesis is that by using visually supported language, high-level accuracy of understanding can be achieved, as high as a normal speech, and meaning can be transferred with higher speed. We can increase our speed of transferring. So my design is basically, I show a sign, and the receiver hears the speech at the same time. So I have 3 levels of integration to the model. At the first level, we show signs of positive, negative, and question. I will show the details in the later slides, but this is the basics. At the second level, I show signs to subject and positive, negative questions. So it's a kind of adding up. And at the third level, I will use signs to show tense of the sentence as well. The language of the experiment was Turkish. I didn't want the proficiency level of the participants to affect the results, so I used Turkish sentences and Turkish examples. I used 6 warm-up questions and 10 actual questions in each level. They were in the random order, and each stimulus has the workflow of like a visual and audio stimulus at the same time, and then a multiple choice question where they had to combine the meanings of visual and sound to get to the answer. So they see the signs on the left side. For example, it might be a plus, negative, or a question. And then they hear the sentences on the right side. And then they try to get to the answer on the right side of the equation. This is the first level's graphic. And second level includes he, I, you, and he, she, it as well. So in the second level, you also try to find out if it is positive, negative question, and who is the subject. And then you try to get to the answer. And at the third level, it also includes the time, the tense. So past, simple present, and future. I used 3 basic tenses. So this is what the participants see. So they see this visual stimulus at the same time with the sound, and they hear something like this. So they need to hear that, keep that in mind, but they're hearing it, they're processing it at the same time. And
we couldn't hear it. What did it say?
So it said, gece seyahat etmek. So you hear it and you see it at the same time. And when the sound ends, the visual goes away as well. So it is, as you can see, did you travel in the past? Did you travel? So that's what should be the outcome in here. So the data I collected was from 22 participants, and I recorded response time and accuracy. I used 3 standard deviations to, omit some results. They were out of our range, and I used RStudio to apply ANOVA test, one-way ANOVA. And my p-value for response time is 0.007. It is really, it's a really strong result. So. For the first level, we had 3.58. Well, I was expecting an increase in the time of response, but it was a different graphic than I was expecting. So at the second level, the response time dropped. I was expecting a linear increase in the time because as they move on to the levels, the questions get difficult. And for accuracy, I have p-value of 0.01, and in this one, again, the second level and the first level are really close, but the third level, interestingly, gives us a better understanding of the sentence, better perception of the speech. And these are the results for individual means of the responses. So for example, the blue line represents the first level for first participant, second participant, and the third participant. And when we look at this graphic, we can see that the response time in the first and 2 levels are really close to each other. And when we look at the accuracy of the response, we can see that the third level, the gray line, is most of the cases higher than the other levels, even though it is the hardest. The increment of speed when the question, the increment of speed when the question split into two parts. So I also tried to make an understanding of the increase in each level. So we have 3 levels and 10 questions in each level. So I divided the questions into 5 questions. So I recorded the first, I gathered the first 5 questions response time, and the second 5 questions response time separately, and I applied t-test, and I got the result of 0.09. And this graphic shows the difference between the first 5 questions and the second 5 questions. I was expecting that as they get used to the question type, they would start to respond faster. So the graphic gives us a little bit of increase, but it is not as significant as I was expecting. So the results, first level and the second level questions may require similar amount of cognitive workloads because they were, most cases, really close to each other in response time and accuracy. And participants didn't show significant adaptation to the questions in each level. So it is the 5 first questions and the 5 last questions. They didn't show any decrease in the time. And participants showed decreasing speed, but increasing success, even though the third level is the hardest. So for the further studies, there might be some questions that I want to ask. So for example, other channels can be applied to this model, not only visual, but we can use somatosensory vibrations and other systems as well. And if the reading time decreases, it is the strength of the study. If the reading time decreases, understanding is better. I mean, there are courses that increase your reading speed, effective reading and other stuff. So they all try to increase your reading speed. So with this model, we read faster. We acquire the input faster. So our understanding might increase in time as well. But we need to design a model instead of sentence by sentence. We need to use a paragraph model to do that. Signals are universal, so it might help to learn new languages. Like you know the signals already. All you need to do is learn the nouns and verbs. The length of the speed time. Well, I didn't include the stimulus time in the results. So if you look at all of it, in a normal speech, we would read around 900 words to give those stimuli, and it would give us 9 minutes around, because 100 per minute. Remember from the first slide. But in my model, instead of 900 words with parallel processing, we only read 100 words. So it is 9 times faster than a normal speech in general. And that's all, I guess. So if there are any questions.
I can have a question. Burak, you talked about this vibration study.
Yes.
Remember the discussion we had in the AI course related to the distinction between syntax and semantics? Do they discuss anything related to this? I mean, do they claim that the deaf person was able to generate a semantics out of these vibrations?
I am not really sure. I only saw their experiments related to vocabulary. So this deaf person looks another way, and they read some words to the deaf person, and the person immediately writes the word on the board. So I didn't see any experiments on semantic part. Okay. So I'm not really sure.
Okay. I will be pleased if you can send the paper to me.
Okay.
So Burak, when we look at the difference between level 1 and level 2, it looks like adding more information didn't necessarily make comprehension any harder, to say the least, because yeah, it certainly didn't make it more difficult to add more information. So what is your take on this? I mean, how would you explain this?
I am not really sure. Maybe the Turkish sentence structure resolves at the end of the sentence. So the subject affects the verb and ending of the verb, and also positivity, negativity, and the other stuff is also at the end of the verb as well. So they are at the same spot in a sentence. Maybe that is the reason they perceive this faster. Their perception is faster. But I think my recordings, my recorded data should be more to discuss more.
Okay, I was also curious about if there are any theories suggesting that there is an optimal amount of information in speech comprehension or comprehension in general, because it looks like, you know, that putting a lot of words does make it more difficult, but that there is like a threshold where the more information you put, the more words you put in a sentence makes it even more easier to comprehend. So yeah, that's something to look into in the future.
Thank you. Okay.
Are there any other questions? Maybe we have time for one more. Okay, if not, then let's let our third speaker speak. Tugçe is now gonna talk about observing word order regularization in an artificial language experiment by iterated learning method.
Okay, hello. So I want to talk a little bit about word order first. So, okay. So in a transitive sentence, there are 3 arguments basically, and these are subject, object, and verb. And there are 6 possible ways to organize, to put these in order. And all these 6 possible orders are actually attested around the languages in the world. So, and most of the languages actually favor one of these 6 to be their dominant word order. And a lot of researchers are actually curious about how or why languages behave in the same manner for preferring a word order. And the answer actually comes from this quotation. It is actually very goodly summarized. So word order is both a necessity and a resource. And it's a necessity because there is no other way for us to articulate words. We have to physically, we have to put them in order while articulating them. And it's a resource because we take this necessity and we turn it actually into our benefit. And by just putting them in an order, we also transfer information with this. For example, English has the strict word order SVO, and if I put this sentence like dog bite man, we already understand that the subject of this sentence is dog without anything else, just putting the words in an order. And if we change the sentence to man bite dog, we again understand the subject changes, and we give this information simply by putting the words in an order. And also I want to talk about a little bit of language evolution, because this study I carried out here is also a kind of a simulation of this evolution. So while studying language evolution, we do not have many resources to look at it, simply because language doesn't leave any fossils behind. But there are some certain rare cases which are invaluable for us to look at language emergence and evolution. So, for example, home sign or family sign or village sign languages are one of these examples. These are basically non-hearing children born into hearing parents, for example. Home sign arises there. These children not exposed to any sign language and also not any spoken language because of the simple fact that they're not hearing. They come up with ways to create a system where they communicate. And this brings us to a point where we can see how language arises out of nothing, basically. And however, to study language evolution, home science and family science may not be the best places, because in the case of home science, there's only one person using this language, and although the parents of the children or the other family members can also learn and use it, when this single person dies, the language disappears. Family sign language is also the same case when this, although it is a more developed language than the home sign, it also disappears when all the deaf members in the family dies. However, village sign languages actually bring us closer to do these studies, because this time languages spoken by a community, and every now and then another deaf member comes into this born into this community, because it's usually in these cases the deafness is genetically transmitted. And we also have the phases of transmission, because there are older generations, younger generations, and we see this transmission of language from the older generations to the youngers, how language evolves during these phases. And actually one example of this comes from Turkey, CTSL, which was brought into the attention of the world by Dr. Rabia Ergin. And it gets its name from the Central Taurus area that it's spoken in. So these are really valuable sources for us to study language evolution. However, again, because of socioeconomical reasons, when these people leave this village, we progressively may lose these languages as well. And another way to so it's not always easy for us to discover these kind of rare cases. And another way an alternative way to study language evolution is actually the laboratory studies with artificial language. And these studies are also advantageous for us, because in natural language cases, language evolves in a very long time, and it's not very efficient maybe to study it. But in laboratory studies, we can simulate the same thing in a very faster way. And also in natural cases, we cannot really interfere with the language itself. However, in the laboratory studies, we can actually manipulate the stimuli, for example, and we can just focus on the specific aspect that we're going to look at. So iterated learning is one of these laboratory language evolution methods. I will just read the definition from here first. So it's a process in which an individual acquires a behavior by observing a similar behavior in another individual who acquired it in the same way. So my experiment is also an iterated learning experiment, so you will better grasp what it is in the later slides as well. But it's basically the same thing that we do in the real life. We observe this language from our parents, friends, environment, and we learn it from them, and they actually learned it in the same way that we did, and we pass it on to the later generations the same way. So we are trying to simulate this in a laboratory environment, basically. So the present study's hypothesis is that transmission of a language and the learning pressure caused by this is one of the underlying factors of a dominant or rule-based word order pattern observed in word languages. What I expect to see here is that over 10 generations, we should observe a decrease in wrong answers, meaning that language becomes easier to learn. And the reason for this is that over generations, participants develop a more structured language out of a fuller random set. And this makes it possible to learn the language, actually. 20 participants were recruited in the study, and 10 female, 10 male, with mean age of 24. And they were all native Turkish speakers, and they all know English as a second language. And the stimuli consisted of an artificial language I actually brought together from the earlier artificial language studies. And it consisted of 24 alien language sentences. All these sentences included 3 words with 3 consonant vowel syllables. And corresponding pictures were also given depicting transitive events. For example, one of the sentences I used was Maholi lemili pohoma in my alien language, and this translates as a cat hits plant. And there were 2 chains in the experiment, and each of them consisted of 10 generations, meaning that 10 participants. And first generations of both chains were trained on a fully random artificial language, and all the other generations were trained on the answers from the preceding generation. Actually, this is where the iterated learning method comes into play. So to present stimuli and record answers, PsychoPy was used. And the trials included, firstly, 3 training sessions in which participants were given 18 alien sentences. One example is here, like lepali nemine vulepa, and English translations like this, and with the corresponding pictures. And an example of it is here, sheep kissing man here. And they were instructed to pay attention to the order of words in a sentence. Like in this case, it's SVO, like the English case. A following test session followed these 3 training sessions, in which participants were given this time 24 sets of randomly ordered alien words. In this case, they are tested on 6 more sets that they were not trained on. And also English translations I included because I just wanted to look at the word order. I just wanted to make them pay attention to the word order, so I didn't train them on this language actually. So in the test phase, they also saw the English translations. But in the test phase, these words were randomly ordered, and participants were asked to type the words in the correct order that they were trained on the training sessions. So the study results showed that over generations, a decrease in the number of errors actually observed. And the last generation of both chains actually performed the best in trials. And so in order to make a statistical analysis of it, I couldn't use a parametric test because I basically have 2 samples here. So I went on with a non-parametric test, with knee test here. So I assumed that the first generations were, because they are trained on a less structured language, and later generations, because language as it is transmitted becomes more structured, later generations are presented with a more structured language. I divided this in 2 and compared the results from first 5 and last 5 generations with the rank analysis here. And the results showed that actually later generations significantly made less errors from the earlier generations here. So what is the reason behind this is that language actually became more structured, which brings us to the second hypothesis. So it became more structured that enabled the participants to learn it easier. But this structuralization didn't happen in the same manner in both chains. In the first chain, for example, the language adopted a more strict SVO order. And it just continued with this order. And in the second chain, what we observed was a little bit different. Here, they developed another solution for this, and they used VSO order for inanimate subjects like car and truck. Car hits man, for example, and they used SVO for all the other subjects. And in summary, actually, in both chains, the errors of first 5 generations are significantly higher than the last 5 generations. And this shows us that language became increasingly learnable over a process of transmission. And second, in both chains, the language developed a structure. Of course, this was not a perfectly well structure. As you can see here, we still see some SOV orders, and this is from the mere fact that participants are trained on this set and they can remember these kind of exceptions and perform good answers, I mean correct answers in the test phase. They can just keep in mind a few exceptions. Here in the case of this as well, we I had 8 inanimate subject sentences. However, 2 more sentences were observed in VSO order. And this made it, I mean, this structuralization made it easier for participants to learn it easier. So as I already mentioned, the type of structure differed in between chains. The first chain adopted the dominant order of SVO, while in the second chain, this structure was developed by assigning different word orders for different subject types. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tugçe. So let's take if there are any questions from the audience. So I would like you to speculate over one issue. So is it that people are trying to converge to the grammatical structure of their native language or the language that they're taking the test?
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe that because why I received this SV order in a high ration is that the stimuli was presented with English translations actually, and they tended to use SVO order for answers that they didn't remember from the training, for example. So the effect of English was actually present in the experiment. In order to prevent this, actually, further studies use sign like gestures, which kind of makes participants to be alienated from their from any spoken language or from the spoken languages of from a modality that they are familiar with, and they just carry out these experiments in gesture, so that it gives more. Those kind of experiments actually give that when you carry out this with gesture method, people actually alienate from their native languages and give those kind of results. So it was a limitation here.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you, Tugçe. So